It was a cold, rainy morning when Daniel made the hardest decision of his life. He stood outside the small orphanage, holding his 3-year-old daughter, Lily, in his arms. The rain fell in heavy drops, making the world around him feel even more distant and cold. He could hear the cries of other children inside, and his own heart was breaking. His hand trembled as he reached for the door, but it felt like his world was falling apart. Daniel had always dreamed of being a good father. He imagined taking Lily to the park, teaching her how to ride a bike, and sharing stories before bed. But life had not been kind to him. After losing his job and going through a difficult divorce, Daniel had found himself struggling with money and his own emotions. He had no family left to turn to, and the weight of responsibility seemed too much for him to bear. For weeks, he tried to figure out how he could make things work. He searched for jobs, but nothing seemed to stick. His apartment was cramped, and the bills piled up. Every night, he lay awake, thinking about Lily and what kind of life he could give her. He loved her more than anything in the world, but he felt powerless. He had nothing to offer her but his love, and he feared that wasn't enough. Finally, in his desperation, Daniel made a decision that haunted him every day after. He couldn't keep Lily, not in the way she deserved. Maybe, just maybe, an orphanage could give her the things he couldn't: a stable home, food, clothes, a better life than the one he could provide. His heart screamed at him to hold on, but his mind told him there was no other choice. As he approached the front door of the orphanage, Lily looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. She didn't understand why they were there or why her father's face looked so sad. She tugged at his sleeve, her little voice filled with confusion. "Daddy, where are we going?" Daniel's throat tightened. How could he explain this to her? How could he tell her that he was leaving her in a place he didn't fully understand, with people she didn't know? He knelt down in front of her, wiping away a tear before it could fall. "I love you so much, Lily," he said softly. "But I think it's time for you to go to a new place where you can have a better life." Lily's small hands reached out for him, but Daniel gently placed her into the arms of a woman who worked at the orphanage. The woman, kind and understanding, smiled warmly at him, though Daniel could see the sadness in her eyes too. She must have seen this before: the pain of parents who couldn't care for their children. She spoke in a calm voice, assuring him that Lily would be safe. But Daniel didn't hear her. He couldn't hear anything except the echo of his own heartbreak. He stood there for a moment, watching as Lily was taken inside the orphanage. His heart felt like it was being ripped out of his chest. He wanted to run after her, scoop her up, and take her back home with him. But he didn't. He turned away, his legs heavy, as if they were made of stone. His hands were shaking, and his eyes were filled with tears. But he kept walking, even though every step felt like it might be his last. The orphanage door closed behind him with a soft thud, and that sound would haunt him for years. Daniel didn't know it then, but his life was about to change forever. He walked away from Lily, not knowing if he would ever see her again, and that was a thought he couldn't bear. But he had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. For years, Daniel tried to forget that day. He threw himself into work, tried to build a new life, and pushed the memory of Lily out of his mind. But no matter how hard he tried, he could never escape the guilt that gnawed at him. The little girl he had left behind stayed with him, a shadow in his heart, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he would never be forgiven. Years passed since Daniel had left Lily at the orphanage, but the pain never truly went away. He had tried to move forward, to forget, but there were always little reminders. The birthday cards he never sent, the empty chair at the dinner table, and the old toys that still sat in the corner of his closet. All of these things haunted him, reminding him of the little girl he had left behind. Daniel had built a new life for himself after the abandonment, or at least he tried to. He found a new job that was stable, and for the first time in years, he had a steady income. He rented a small apartment in the city, a place he could finally call his own. He even started dating again, though it was hard to truly open up to anyone. No one knew about his past, the regret he carried with him, or the guilt that weighed him down like a 100-pound anchor. But everything changed one rainy evening. Daniel was sitting at his kitchen table, flipping through old family albums, when he stumbled upon a photo of Lily. She was about 3 years old in the picture, the same age she was when he left her at the orphanage. She had a bright smile on her face, and her eyes sparkled with innocence. In that moment, Daniel felt a sharp pain in his chest, as though someone had suddenly reached in and squeezed his heart. The memories flooded back, the way Lily had clung to him that morning, asking where they were going. The look of confusion in her eyes as he handed her over to the stranger. The weight of guilt that had followed him for all those years. He hadn't wanted to leave her. He had wanted to give her everything. But he felt like he had failed her. And now, years later, he was still carrying that failure. Daniel couldn't keep ignoring it. He couldn't pretend anymore that the past didn't matter. As he stared at the photograph of Lily, he realized that he had to do something. He had to find her, to make things right. But he wasn't sure how to begin. Where would he even start? He didn't know where she had ended up, who had adopted her, or if she even remembered him at all. The thought of reaching out to her, of facing the consequences of his actions, scared him. But he knew that staying silent was no longer an option. He sat there, lost in thought for hours, trying to figure out the best way to find Lily. The idea of showing up at her doorstep after all these years seemed impossible, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to try. It was the only thing left to do. The guilt would never go away unless he took the chance to make things right. The next day, Daniel began his search. He reached out to the orphanage, hoping to get some information about where Lily might have gone after she was adopted. He was nervous, unsure of how they would respond. He hadn't even thought about the possibility of her being adopted into a loving family. All he knew was that he had made the wrong decision when he left her behind, and now he had to find a way to fix it. The response from the orphanage came quickly, but it wasn't what Daniel had expected. The woman who ran the place remembered Lily well. She told Daniel that his daughter had been adopted by a couple who were eager to provide her with a loving home. She didn't have many details, but she told him that Lily was well taken care of, and that she had grown up in a safe, supportive environment. Relief washed over Daniel. At least she hadn't suffered like he feared. Still, the knowledge that she had been raised by strangers, and that he had never been there for her, stung. He needed more than just a vague promise that she was okay. He needed to know what had become of her. How was she doing now? What kind of life had she lived? Was she happy? The woman at the orphanage gave him a name. Lily's adoptive parents. They were well known in the community, successful, and kind-hearted people. Daniel's heart raced as he typed their names into the search bar on his computer. He knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't turn back now. He had to find his daughter, no matter the cost. As he prepared for the next step of his search, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what he would say to Lily when they finally met again. What could he say after all this time? Could she ever forgive him for abandoning her? The answers to these questions would soon reveal themselves. But for now, all he could do was hold on to the hope that he could make things right. He was ready to face his past, whatever it took. Daniel sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the computer screen. He had spent the past few hours searching for any information about Lily's adoptive parents, trying to track down their contact details. The search had been more difficult than he had imagined. It wasn't just a matter of typing their names into a search engine. He had to dig deeper, contact people from the orphanage, and piece together any little detail he could find. Every step felt like he was uncovering another layer of guilt and regret. But he knew he couldn't stop now. He had to find her. The woman at the orphanage had given him a few clues, but they were vague. She had mentioned that Lily was adopted by a well-off couple who lived in a nearby town. She couldn't remember their exact address, but she knew they were active in the community. Daniel knew this was a good lead. If he could find their names, maybe he could track them down. After a few more hours of searching, he found something. A local news article mentioned Lily's adoptive parents, Noting that they had recently hosted a charity event, the article listed their names, along with some details about their philanthropic work. Daniel's heart raced as he wrote down the names and looked for any way to contact them. The idea of meeting them filled him with anxiety, but he also felt a strange sense of hope. Perhaps they would understand. Maybe they would let him meet Lily. The next morning, Daniel decided to take a different approach. He had been debating whether to send a letter, but something about the idea of not seeing Lily face to face made him uneasy. He didn't want to send a letter that might never be read. He needed to hear her voice, so he decided to go to the town where Lily had grown up. He knew it was a risk. He wasn't sure how the adoptive parents would feel about him showing up uninvited, but it was the only option left. He had to face whatever consequences came his way. The drive to the town was long and quiet. Daniel kept his hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind racing. He passed through small neighborhoods, each one reminding him of the life he had once hoped for Lily. What kind of person had she become? Was she happy? Did she ever think about him? The questions seemed to pile up with every mile. But he couldn't turn back now. He was so close. When Daniel arrived in the town, he parked his car near a quiet street and walked toward the address he had found online. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe a grand house, a place that would feel so far removed from his own life. He didn't know how much had changed over the years, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to see Lily. He had to know that she was okay. As he walked down the tree-lined street, Daniel's heart began to pound. His footsteps felt louder than they should have, echoing in his ears as he approached a large house with a well-kept lawn. The house was beautiful, elegant but welcoming. He could tell that this was the home where Lily had grown up. The thought of her being in this place, cared for by strangers, made his chest tighten. But it was also a relief. She had had a good life, at least from what he could see. Still, there was a part of him that ached to know how much she had missed by not having him in her life. He took a deep breath before he rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house, and Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what he was going to say. Would the adoptive parents be angry? Would they refuse to let him see her? He didn't know, but he had to try. He had to take this chance. A few moments later, the door opened, and a woman in her late 40s appeared. She had a kind face and warm eyes, but there was a hint of surprise in her expression. "Can I help you?" she asked gently. Daniel swallowed hard. "My name is Daniel. I'm looking for my daughter, Lily. He paused, unsure of how to continue. His voice cracked, and he felt a wave of emotion threaten to overwhelm him. "I left her at the orphanage 14 years ago, and I need to see her." The woman's expression softened, though there was still a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Lily," she said, her voice calm. But there was something protective in it. "She's grown up now. I'm afraid you can't just show up like this." Daniel nodded, feeling a mix of guilt and fear. "I understand," he said quietly. I need to talk to her. Please, I can't keep living with the regret. I've thought about her every day. I just want to know if she's okay." The woman hesitated for a moment, then looked back into the house. After what felt like an eternity, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said, her voice softer now. "But please, don't overwhelm her. It's been a long time." Daniel nodded, his heart racing. He was about to meet Lily again after all these years, and he had no idea what to expect. But one thing was clear. This was his only chance to make things right. Daniel stepped inside the house, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman who had opened the door, Lily's adoptive mother, led him through a hallway decorated with family photos. The walls were filled with images of birthdays, holidays, and vacations, moments that, in another life, Daniel might have shared with Lily. His stomach tightened as he thought about all the years he had missed. They entered a bright living room, cozy and comfortable, with a large window letting in the afternoon sunlight. Lily's adoptive mother gestured for Daniel to sit on the couch. She moved to a chair across from him, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently, her eyes filled with concern. "Lily has a life now. She's grown up and has her own plans." Daniel nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know, but I need to see her. I need to know how she's doing. I never meant to hurt her. I couldn't give her the life she deserved." The woman's face softened, but there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. She sat quietly for a moment, as if weighing her options before she spoke again. "I understand that you're sorry, but it's been a long time. She's a young woman now, and I can't promise how she'll feel about meeting you." "I'm not asking for anything," Daniel said, his voice shaky. "I just want to know if she's happy, if she's okay, if she remembers me." The adoptive mother gave him a long, hard look before she stood up. "I'll talk to her. Please, wait here." Daniel nodded, feeling his heart beat faster as the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. He sat in silence, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. What would Lily think of him after all these years? Would she be angry? Would she even remember him? The questions gnawed at him, but he tried to focus on one thing. He had to make things right, no matter what. A few minutes later, the door to the living room opened, and a young woman stepped inside. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. She looked so much like the little girl he had once known, but so different at the same time. Lily had grown up. She was no longer the child he had abandoned, but a young woman with a confident stride and a calm, composed expression. Her eyes, though, still held the same spark they had when she was a toddler, the same curiosity that had once made him laugh. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel could see the hesitation in Lily's eyes, the confusion, and perhaps even a little anger. She stood by the door, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked at him for a long time before she finally spoke. "You're him," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something Daniel couldn't quite place. "The man who left me." Daniel's heart sank. He had expected this, but hearing her say it out loud made the pain all the more real. He started, but the words seemed to get stuck in his throat. He had no excuse for what he had done. There was nothing he could say that would take away the hurt. Lily's gaze softened for just a moment, but it was clear that the hurt was still there. "I didn't need you to be perfect," she said quietly. "I just needed you to be there. You don't know how many times I wondered why you left. I was too young to understand. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough for you." Daniel's heart shattered as she spoke. "You were more than good enough, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were everything I wanted, but I was selfish. I couldn't handle it. And I left you in the hands of strangers, hoping they could give you a better life than I could." Lily took a deep breath, her arms still crossed. "I had a good life," she said, though her voice wavered a little. "My parents." She paused, glancing over at the woman who had brought Daniel into the room. "They love me. I've never doubted that. But sometimes I've wondered if things could have been different. If you had been there, if you hadn't left." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. I can't change what happened, but I want you to know that I've thought about you every day. I've regretted it every day. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." Lily was silent for a moment, looking down at the floor. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, but there was something in it that made Daniel hold his breath. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she said softly. "I'm angry, and I'm hurt, but I also need to understand. Maybe we can talk more. Maybe we can start over." The words were like a small ray of light breaking through a dark cloud. Daniel's heart swelled with hope. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to heal. Over the next few days, Daniel and Lily's relationship was like walking on a tightrope. There was still a lot of pain and confusion between them, but there was also a sense of cautious hope. For the first time in many years, Daniel felt like he was on the path to redemption, though he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had left Lily behind, and the scars were still fresh in her heart. But every conversation, no matter how small, seemed to take them one step closer to understanding. The days that followed their first meeting were filled with long talks. They spent hours in the living room of Lily's home, talking about their lives, their feelings, and everything that had happened in the years apart. Daniel listened as Lily shared memories of her childhood, her family, and the life she had built. She talked about her adoptive parents and how they had always supported her, given her love, and helped her grow into the person she was today. Daniel was amazed at how strong Lily had become. She had dealt with the questions, the uncertainty, and the feelings of abandonment, yet she still seemed to have so much love and kindness in her heart. He admired her for it, though a deep sadness still lingered. He wished he could have been there to help her through it all, to be the father she needed, but he was a stranger now, just someone who had left her behind. Lily, on the other hand, was trying to come to terms with her emotions. It wasn't easy for her to forgive him, and she knew that, in time, she would need to process everything. But deep down, she knew she wanted some kind of relationship with him. It wasn't about picking up where they left off. It was about finding a new way to move forward together. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Lily spoke up. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what could have been," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I'm willing to try to understand you. I just need time." Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't expect anything from you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will do whatever it takes to prove to you that I want to be a part of your life, even if it's just a little bit at a time." Over the next few weeks, Daniel visited more often, always careful to respect Lily's space and not overwhelm her. They spent time together doing simple things, like having coffee or walking in the park. Sometimes, they didn't talk much, but just being in each other's presence seemed to help. Daniel was learning more about who Lily had become, and Lily was slowly learning who he was now. One afternoon, Daniel took Lily to a small cafe in the town where they used to live. As they sat across from each other, he noticed how much she had changed. The little girl he had once known was now a young woman, confident and wise beyond her years. She had a warmth about her that made people feel comfortable, and he couldn't help but feel proud of her. Lily took a sip of her coffee, then looked at Daniel with a serious expression. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, "about how you never wanted to hurt me. I get it. I know you didn't leave me because you didn't love me, but it's still hard for me to wrap my head around why you did it." Daniel's chest tightened. He had expected this question, but hearing it again still stung. "I didn't think I could give you the life you deserved. I thought if I stayed, I would only make things worse. I was so lost in my own problems that I couldn't see what you needed from me. And for that, I'm so sorry." Lily looked down at her hands for a moment, deep in thought. "I get it. I think you were scared, but I was scared too. I was so little, and I didn't understand why you left. I thought maybe you didn't want me anymore." Daniel's heart broke at the thought. "Lily, I never stopped wanting you. I thought about you every single day. I thought about how much I missed you, how much I wished I had been there for you." Lily looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know if I can forgive you completely yet. I'm still trying to make sense of everything. But I do know this. I want to try. I want to get to know you again, even if it's hard." Daniel felt a weight lift off his chest. He had no illusions that everything would be perfect right away. Healing would take time, and trust would have to be rebuilt slowly. But for the first time in years, he felt like there was a chance to build something new with Lily, even if it was just the beginning of a long journey. And as they walked down the street together, side by side, Daniel knew that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be more difficult days ahead, but there was also hope. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he was finally heading in the right direction, toward healing, toward forgiveness, and toward a future with Lily. The weeks that followed were filled with small steps. Daniel and Lily continued to spend time together, slowly building a new relationship. Each visit felt like they were slowly chipping away at the distance between them. There were moments of awkwardness, moments of silence, but also moments of connection. Daniel could see that Lily was opening up more each time, even though there was still a lot she kept inside. One evening, Daniel invited Lily to dinner at a small restaurant he had been to before. It wasn't fancy, but it had a warm, cozy atmosphere, and Daniel thought it would be a good place to talk more. He had been thinking a lot about their conversations, and he wanted to tell Lily something important. As they sat at a table by the window, the sun setting behind them, Daniel looked at Lily and took a deep breath. "Lily, I know it's been a long road for both of us, and I know that I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for. But I want you to know that I'm here now, and I want to be a part of your life, no matter what that looks like." Lily looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. She had heard him say similar things before, but this time it felt different. "I know, Dad. I've been thinking about it a lot too. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I'm willing to try. I want us to build something, even if it takes time." Daniel felt a wave of relief. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but hearing those words from Lily made him feel like there was hope. The years of regret and guilt were slowly starting to fade, replaced by the possibility of a new beginning. Their dinner was quiet but comfortable. They talked about small things, how Lily had been doing in school, what Daniel had been up to, and the changes they had both gone through. There was no rushing, no pressure. It felt natural, even though it was still a bit awkward at times. But Daniel was patient. He knew that time would heal the wounds, and they just needed to take things one day at a time. A few days later, Daniel invited Lily to visit the town where they had lived when she was younger. It was a small, quiet place, but it held so many memories for him. He wanted to show her the house where they had once lived, even though it was no longer his home. He wanted to share a piece of his past with her, to show her that there had been good times before everything changed. As they walked through the familiar streets, Daniel pointed out places that had been important to him. "This is where we used to go for ice cream," he said with a smile. "And down this street was the park where we would play catch. I remember you loved running around on the swings." Lily smiled, listening to him with interest. It was strange for her to hear about her life before she had been adopted. She had only ever known the family who had raised her, but it was clear that there had been another life before that, a life with Daniel. When they reached the old house, Daniel paused for a moment, taking in the sight of it. It had changed a bit over the years, but it still felt familiar. "This is where we lived before I made the decision I regret every day," Daniel said quietly. "I wish I had been a better father, a better person, but I can't change the past." Lily looked up at the house, her eyes thoughtful. "It's strange, seeing it now. I've heard about it, but I never really imagined it would look like this." For a moment, they stood in silence, just looking at the house. It was a reminder of a different time, a time that had been filled with both hope and heartbreak. But Lily didn't feel anger when she looked at it. Instead, she felt a sense of understanding. She knew her father had made mistakes, but she also knew that he was trying now. As they turned to leave, Lily spoke up. "Thank you for showing me this," she said softly. "I don't know if I fully understand everything, but it helps to see it with my own eyes. I think we're making progress, Dad. Slowly, but surely." Daniel's heart swelled with emotion. "Thank you, Lily. I know it's not easy, but I promise I'll keep trying. I want to be there for you, in whatever way I can." The rest of the day was spent talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard conversations to be had and difficult feelings to work through. But it was progress. They were learning to trust each other again, little by little. As Daniel drove Lily home that evening, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the future. It was clear that their journey was far from over, but they were no longer stuck in the past. They were moving forward, one step at a time. And that, for the first time in years, felt like enough. The weeks that followed continued to bring small victories for Daniel and Lily. Each time they met, they grew a little closer. There were still moments of tension, but there were also moments of laughter and connection. Daniel had never imagined that rebuilding a relationship could be so hard, but he also never imagined how rewarding it would be to see Lily open up, little by little. One sunny afternoon, Daniel decided to invite Lily to a family barbecue. It wasn't a big event, just a few close friends and family members, but he wanted her to meet the people who had become important to him in the years he had been away. He knew this was another step in the process, showing Lily that he had a life now, one that he wanted to share with her. Lily agreed, though she was nervous. She didn't know many of Daniel's friends, and she wasn't sure how they would feel about her. Would they judge her for not being the daughter Daniel had left behind? Would they make her feel out of place? She had no idea, but she was willing to give it a try. The day of the barbecue arrived, and Daniel picked her up early. As they arrived at the house, the smell of grilled food filled the air, and the sound of laughter and conversation greeted them. People were sitting around picnic tables, enjoying drinks and chatting about everything from work to the weather. Daniel led Lily to a corner of the backyard where a few people were sitting. "These are some of my closest friends," he said with a smile. "This is Susan and Dave. I've known them for years." Lily smiled politely, though she felt a little shy. She was used to being around her adoptive family, but these were strangers to her. She didn't know how to fit into this world. But as the afternoon went on, Lily started to relax. Susan and Dave were kind and welcoming, asking her about her life, her interests, and her plans for the future. They didn't seem to mind that Lily wasn't the little girl they had expected to meet. They were just happy to get to know her. The conversation shifted to memories of Daniel's past. "We all used to go camping together," Susan said with a laugh. And Daniel would always insist on making the campfire the biggest one possible. He thought it was funny to scare us with it, but it was really just dangerous. Daniel chuckled, looking a little embarrassed. "I was a lot younger and a bit more reckless back then," he admitted. Lily smiled at her father. She was beginning to see him in a new light, not just as the man who had left her, but as someone with a past, someone who had made mistakes, but also had moments of joy and laughter in his life. She was starting to realize that her father wasn't a perfect man, but he was trying to be better now. As the evening went on, Lily found herself feeling more comfortable. She was still quiet at times, but she found herself laughing at jokes, joining in conversations, and even helping set up the food. She had always been a bit reserved, but there was something about being around people who accepted her, even without knowing everything about her past, that made her feel at ease. Later in the evening, Daniel pulled Lily aside. "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice soft. Lily smiled, her eyes bright. "I'm doing okay. I was nervous at first, but everyone here is really nice. They don't make me feel weird or out of place." Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He was so glad that Lily was starting to feel like she could be herself around his friends. It was a small step, but it meant a lot. "I'm glad you're feeling better," Daniel said. "And I want you to know something. I know I can't change the past, but I'm here now. I want to be a part of your future, whatever that looks like, and I'm proud of you for giving me this chance." Lily looked up at him, her expression softening. "I don't know what the future holds either, but I think we're doing okay, one day at a time." Daniel smiled, his heart full. It wasn't perfect, but they were moving forward, slowly but surely. And that was enough for him. As they stood together, watching the sun set over the backyard, Daniel felt a quiet sense of peace settle in his chest. He knew there would still be hard days ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. As the night wore on, and people began to leave, Lily and Daniel stayed behind, talking in the quiet of the yard. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were strangers anymore. They were father and daughter, reconnecting and learning to build something new from the pieces of the past. It was a long road, but they were walking it together. And as Daniel looked at Lily, he knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges to face, but there was also hope, a hope that they could move forward, one step at a time, and rebuild the bond they had once lost. As time passed, Daniel and Lily's relationship continued to grow. The bond between them was still fragile, but it was becoming stronger with each passing day. They had both learned a lot about each other and about themselves. Their journey wasn't easy, but it was filled with moments of understanding, forgiveness, and hope. One day, Lily invited Daniel to her graduation ceremony. It was a milestone in her life, and she wanted him to be there. Daniel was honored and nervous at the same time. He knew how important this day was for her, and he didn't want to mess it up. But he also knew that he had made progress with her, and this was another chance to show her that he was there for her, no matter what. The ceremony was held in a large auditorium, and Lily looked beautiful in her cap and gown. As Daniel sat in the audience, watching her walk across the stage to receive her diploma, his heart swelled with pride. He couldn't believe how far they had come. The little girl he had once held in his arms was now a young woman, ready to take on the world. After the ceremony, Daniel found Lily in the crowd of graduates and their families. She was smiling, surrounded by her friends and teachers. When she saw him, her face lit up. She walked over to him and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for coming, Dad," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "This means so much to me." Daniel hugged her back, his own eyes welling up with tears. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm so proud of you, Lily. You've worked so hard, and I know you're going to do amazing things." Lily smiled, pulling away slightly to look at him. "I don't know what the future holds, but I feel ready for it. And I know you'll be there for me, even if we're still figuring things out." Daniel nodded, his heart full. "I will always be there, no matter what. I'm just so glad to be a part of your life now." The day was filled with celebration. Lily's friends gathered around, and they took pictures, laughed, and talked about the next steps in their lives. Daniel felt like he was on the outside looking in, but he was okay with it. He knew that this was Lily's moment, and he was just glad to be there to witness it. As the evening came to an end, Daniel and Lily walked together to the parking lot. They didn't have to say much. The silence between them felt comfortable, like they had reached a place where words weren't always needed. On the drive home, Daniel turned to her. "You know, I've been thinking about something," he said. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to keep being a part of your future. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to take it one day at a time." Lily looked at him, her eyes soft and understanding. "I think we're doing okay, Dad. It's not perfect, but we're getting there. And that's enough for me." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. For the first time, he truly felt like he was a father again. It didn't matter that they hadn't been together for all the years she had grown up. What mattered was that they were together now, building something new, step by step. In the months that followed, their relationship continued to strengthen. Daniel kept his promises to Lily, showing up for important events in her life, offering support when she needed it, and being a steady presence in her world. They still had difficult moments, times when the past seemed to weigh heavily on them, but they faced them together, always moving forward. One day, Lily came to Daniel with exciting news. She had decided to go to college, and she had been accepted into a program that would help her pursue a career in healthcare. She was nervous but excited about the future, and she wanted Daniel to know how much his support meant to her. "I don't know where this journey will take me, but I know I'm ready," Lily said with a smile. "And I know that you're a part of it." Daniel was overwhelmed with pride. He had always wanted the best for Lily, and now she was taking the next big step toward her dreams. "I'm so proud of you, Lily," he said, "and I'll be here for you every step of the way, no matter where you go." Lily smiled, her eyes shining. "Thanks, Dad. I'm glad you're here." As Daniel watched Lily walk toward her future, he knew that this was just the beginning of their new chapter together. There would be challenges ahead, but they were no longer defined by the past. They were building a future, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a stronger bond. It wasn't always going to be easy, but Daniel had learned one thing through it all. The journey was worth it, and as long as they had each other, they could face anything that came their way. And so, they continued to move forward, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next.